Alright, imagine you are just waking up on the 22nd of June, you're a Soviet commander, and you're getting bombed. Yes, we are playing some more Gary Grisby's War in the East. Well, we are playing. I was playing. I am actually recording this after the fact. I'm playing the Minsk 1941 scenario. As you may have noticed, the city of Minsk is going to be what we are defending, and I'm playing as the Soviet Union, though, well, there's some things that we'll see later make me feel like this scenario was not really meant to be played as the Soviet Union, but as can be shown on the screen, the Germans are just advancing mercilessly. And that's kind of why I thought that really you don't have all that much agency as the player in this scenario. Like, it's actually a very, very short scenario. It's 3 turns. Just like in real life, the Battle of Minsk was relatively quick. Relatively, I say. And it involved the Germans punching through on 2 pincers all the way to the city of Minsk, capital of the Belarusian SSR, and encircling a massive amount of Soviet troops, which you can see right now are on the screen, getting pushed back. And as a player, you don't start with the first turn. This is actually how the scenario just starts. You just jump in and you get pummeled to bits by the Nazi armies. And essentially, that is the whole point of the scenario. You're trying to not lose as hard as possible. Essentially, the way the scenario is structured is that there's a few victory points in the rear that you need to hold. And if you can hold them, essentially, if you can prevent the Germans from capturing them on the second turn, you win. And of course, the main one is Minsk. But as you can see, the Panzer spearheads are advancing just across the Russian steppe, even though, you know, that's not really a steppe. But yeah, they're advancing across the plains, scattering Red Army units as they go, and they're moving towards the city of Minsk. However, despite their efforts, they can't get there on the first turn because there's just way too many Soviet troops stacked around the city. And they also advance up north, bypassing Kaunas and Vilnius. Vilnius being, of course, the capital of the Lithuanian SSR, and Kaunas being the capital of independent Lithuania in the 1930s. Alright, here we are. I'm gonna speed up the footage, as you can see, because it's not like I'm doing anything too important. As you can see, I am garrisoning Kaunas, which the Germans did not actually take. So this is actually a very, very good thing, because it just gives me a little bit of extra time to slow down the Germans. Also, some of my units are moving towards Vilnius, which again has been left by the German spearheads as they had more pressing concerns, aka advancing towards the northeast and the river Dvina. But of course, that leaves my units time to get back. As you can see, those are victory locations, so it's actually very, very good that I can sneak back in them. And then I decide to pull as many forces back to Minsk as possible, because clearly that's going to be the main objective for the Germans in the next turn, and so the better defense I can arrange around the city, the better. Other VPs include Mogiliev to the east, and essentially, yeah, except for the ones that you see right now are under my control, the only places that I have to defend are to the extreme east of the map. Vitebsk, Mogiliev, those areas that right now are covered by my unit bar. You can see them briefly every once in a while. And what essentially you need to do to defend them is, you can see there's a lot of rivers, a lot of forests, and not really all that much in terms of actual traversable terrain around here. The terrain around Belarusia is, of course, very, very bad. So that is essentially what you need to do. You need to put some stopgaps, some obstacles in the path of the German advance eastward, which is going to happen regardless. And you need to do that on the first turn with whatever you've got that the Germans just haven't scattered to the wind. And that's essentially the whole point of the scenario. You don't really have control over much else. That's what you can do, and that's what I am going to do to get victory. Again, just try to slow down the enemy as much as possible. I cut down as many rail line links as I can. Right now that what Rise Division's over there. I cut out a part of the footage because it was about like me moving around all the units that are actually in the pocket to the west. And the units in that pocket, to be completely honest, don't matter, because once they're surrounded, there's not much that they can do. And now I'm just bombing their advanced columns, trying to see if that can slow down in any way. As you can see, like, these units over here can't really move and attack territory. And they can't even, well, they can attack other enemy units, but at a very, very reduced chance of success. So their participation, once they're surrounded, is essentially nothing. So I cut forward to when I actually have the end turn sequence. And as you can see, the Germans attack Minsk, but the glorious troops of the Red Army repulse them. And that is essentially what is going to give you the victory or the defeat. If you can hold Minsk on the first turn. So just pile troops in there, as many as you can, 3 divisions, well equipped, and just try to hold. The Germans try to push me out of Vilnius, and they succeed, but Kaunas actually holds, at least for now. And the Germans are closing the noose around the troops that are trapped in the western pocket. Historically, that was one of the first, in fact, probably the first major encirclement, or as the Germans say, Kessel, cauldron, that the Soviet army was trapped into. The main advanced troops that had moved into the eastern Polish regions, well, were at the time eastern Polish regions, and today they're part of western Belarusia. And yeah, they moved into there, abandoned their earlier positions and their earlier fortifications, and essentially stood exposed without really knowing the terrain, knowing where they were, and they'd just been there for like a year and a half. And once that was done, well, obviously things are not looking all that good for them, because the Germans are just easily able to push a pincer movement all the way to Minsk. This aided by the fact that the German Army Group Center actually had 2 panzer groups. Essentially, the way the German armored troops were organized in the Eastern Front's initial offensive was that every army group, of which there were 3, north, center, and south, had 1 panzer group, except the central one, which had 2. So there were 4 panzer groups, 2 in the center, which were now, well, are now advancing towards Minsk. And that's essentially what happens. So the VPs right now are in my favor, as you can see, 129 to 125. And the main points are coming in from Minsk, Vitebsk, and Mogilev. Mogilev and Vitebsk being the 2 cities that you see to the extreme right of the map. 2 important rail junctions and the gateways to Smolensk. This whole region, as you can see, is just covered in obstacles, and the Germans are having some major difficulties getting across there. Lots of marshes, lots of rivers. So that's essentially why the Soviet Red Army kind of has the chance to slow them down. In real life itself, oh, by the way, I've already cut to the end of the turn, as you can see, because, I mean, there was nothing else of important, you know, that was actually important to do. So they take Minsk. My rifle divisions that were in the city surrendered, because of course they had encircled the city previously, and that reduced their morale a lot. But that's fine, honestly, because they held in place for a while, in fact for enough. And yeah, that was all that they needed to do. Now it's just about just trying to defend as much as possible. Defend strong points, defend river crossings and cities. So as I was saying, the Soviet Red Army's western fronts that were encircled by the German pincers actually ended up fighting for a long while, a lot more than the German high command really planned for. An excellent kind of book about this is actually When Titans Clashed by David Glantz. and it deals with essentially the whole war. It's kind of dry in some places, but it's very, very detailed when it comes to how like the high commands were planning their offensives and their operations, and the sort of overall grand strategic situation. As you can see, I have 40 points more than the Germans, and this is the last turn. It's turn 3. At next turn, the scenario is gonna end, and we're gonna, well, win, because as you can see, we have the advantage. So just like, you know, I wasn't really sure how it worked, if it would have counted this turn or not. So I just to be sure, moved troops around, just placing divisions at crossing points and all of that. So as I was saying, essentially what the Germans were sort of hoping was in World War I in the East, or World War II in the East, Operation Barbarossa, to deliver a knockout blow to the Soviet army at the border. That was essentially in line with their original strategic thinking, which essentially involved the decisive battle that would destroy the enemy. And since the Soviet troops that were actually encircled fought so fiercely and required so long and so many troops to suppress and take down, that allowed the Soviet army much more time to actually regroup farther east, which we're going to take a look at in further scenarios, I think. But yes, this is essentially the end. Just using my Air Force a little bit. Air Force is still kind of weird. I still don't understand exactly how it works in Gary Grisby's, but that's fine. And essentially, at this point, we are at the end of the scenario. And you will soon see that we will get the victory screen. Here it is. And yeah, as you can see there, it's actually bugged. It didn't record it. But yeah. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.